Can I ask about reclaiming the St. Joseph's Mission Indian Residential School? How did that process come about, and what did it mean?
Yeah, so we had the Prime Minister here in our community that brought a ton of profile to the region. He came and he visited the site of the former residential school of St. Joseph's Mission. That is the residential school that my dad went to, my grandma, and numerous others from multiple nations throughout this region and really throughout the province of British Columbia. So far, through our investigative works, we've identified over 50 nations or 50 communities, sorry, that are represented with children at that school. No, but it wasn't just a Williams Lake First Nation school. It was, there was Secwepemc kids that went there. There were Chilcotin kids, Stalium, Daggett, Newhall. You had done the list of kids that went there. I mean, it was pretty scary. There aren't very many good stories that came out of that school, a lot of trauma and a lot of triggers. So when the announcement of the 215 came out of KIB, we started, down our own path, our own investigation, and working collaboratively with the province of British Columbia, with the federal government, and making sure that we had the funding and the resources and the support, but that we were leading those works. And of course, we hold up ceremony in that conversation. But what we found is it's resulted in us, further reinforcing that there's a lot of healing that needs to happen in our communities. It's not just, like I said, a Williams Lake First Nation concern and issue. It is an Indigenous issue. And why aren't our kids learning about the residential schools in the curriculum of our school districts and our territories? No, I never learned about them. I'm not sure about you, but we're starting to see that movement where curriculum is changing, and those teachers and those educational institutions are starting to hold up and educate individuals on that story. And I mean, that is just as important as the work that's going on over there. We want to be able to break that cycle. And, on the other side of that, we still get conversations and we still get comments with our survivors and our elders around, they don't want to talk about it anymore. And they don't want to hear about it anymore. And that's in the past. But by keeping that mainstream media, we've been able to continue to make sure that work is getting done, which is not easy. I mean, I hold up our investigative team, that Whitney Spearing, Charlene Bellew, Nancy Sandy. I mean, those are Charlene and Nancy. Those are two former chiefs that are really spearheading that interview investigative piece with our research team led by Whitney Spearing. And I just, you hold them up in your thoughts and your prayers on a daily basis because of how intense that work is. So in our territory where St. Joseph's Mission is located, it's all private property there. So it's private property where the school used to sit in the outbuildings. Then it's private property as you move out into the valley, more private property as you get to the edges of the valley, on top of the valley. And as we start ground truthing the I guess the properties, you start to realize how complicated it gets right away. Through interviews, through research, through the archives, we're bringing those survivors out onto the grounds and having them tell our stories and show us, areas of interest to get started with the ground penetrating radar works. But when you're dealing with multiple property owners, it gets so much more tough because you're like really kind of, hoping, and so far so good. It's been really great with the private property owners. But I mean, they could stop those works if they wanted. And that's the biggest fear. And that's why we push the feds and we work collaboratively with Brooks and Shannon Waddell on that 14-acre parcel where the school used to sit. And we were able to find some success and purchase that 14-acre parcel where the school sat, where the gym sits, numerous other outbuildings where the nuns used to stay and the priests used to stay, for example, and where the graveyard is, the historical graveyard that sat in that valley. So, I mean, that has alleviated a lot of the pressure around making sure that we can continue to get those works done. It's brought us together as a team and as a community, and it's just made the conversations easier on how we move forward and chart that path. And gives us peace of mind of what we can make that site, because that's also going to be a big part of it. There's maybe eventually we get to an exhumation conversation that brings all of the other communities together in ceremony. But, what about after that, and how we make that site into a place of healing as opposed to a place of hate and anger and frustration? Because, people want to gather there, and we've got to make it safe, and we want to make sure that we honor the ancestors that are buried there.
This is a very complicated subject, and I don't know if you saw that I interviewed Candice Malcolm, and the organization she founded, True North Media, wrote a book called Grave Error, where she disputes a lot of these claims. She questions a lot of it, and I did my best to have a sensitive conversation with her, where we start with these are human beings, these are individuals who were connected and had family members and loved ones and never got to reach their full potential. One of the places we started with, though, was she pushed back and said, do you really think that nuns and these types of people were just letting kids die and letting them be murdered, and that was just going on in Canada and nobody cared? That was one of her first comments, and I'm wondering what your perspective on that is.
I mean, I've heard those stories firsthand of the horrific things that happened at that school that is known as St. Joseph's Mission. So I would contest her right away in any of the comments that she makes. That is calling our elders liars. And when you see the emotion, you hear the stories, and you look at the abuse that has been done to date, and then you look at that archival works, the charges that were filed historically, and taking those priests to tasks, and there is a legacy of horrific acts. So I don't know how she would want to say otherwise. I mean, it's documented, but I think there's always going to be naysayers, and when we think about, you want to talk about proving them wrong, getting to a place of excavation. You will never prove that those anomalies or reflections are unmarked graves until you do that. So, eventually we'll probably get to that place, but it's going to take time, and there's a lot of healing that needs to happen for that to take place as well. I mean, you look at even our site and where we're at and where we're going. I mean, we could still be a year or years away from that conversation, and that's maybe that's even being ambitious. There are a lot of communities that are saying they don't want to do that, and that's something that we're going to have to weigh into the decision making of how we move forward in a year and coming years.
One of the other comments that she made was that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission took place, and they know exactly how many students went there and how many students passed away due to illnesses, or her claim is that that's all already been documented. And so if there were missing children, they would have been documented in the National Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And so this work is already complete. And my counterpoints to her was, one, if you did lose a child in an organization like this, there would be incentives to cover it up, to not have those stories told, and that many people were fleeing from these circumstances. And so there would be arguments that they ran away, and so they were never documented leaving. What are your thoughts on the fact that some of these people may not be documented?
100% facts. You hear even stories at St. Joseph's Mission. I mean, these are public stories that are even told in that sugarcane documentary that is going to be coming out later this year, made public, and kids getting thrown in an incinerator. I mean, how do you approach that without getting emotional? Extremely challenging and difficult, and the amount of trauma that comes from even hearing a story like that is something that we have to live with and hold up the individuals that are telling it in a way that is super challenging. mental health and wellness of our survivors is it's of utmost importance in this language, ceremony, culture revitalization discussion that we continue to have. They fought so hard to give us this life that we have as Indigenous peoples in our communities, that we have the ability to celebrate that part of our history, speaking our language and singing our songs and participating in ceremony. And sometimes we take it for granted, and we need to get passionate about it again to honor and hold them up, and really, fight back to those individuals that are calling us liars or saying that it's not true and it's a money grab. I mean, you can't put a price tag on the health and wellness of our community. It's just something that needs to be done.
On that point, I'd just like to point out that, and I'm hoping you can share your story as well. My mother was born with fetal alcohol syndrome disorder as a consequence of her mother enduring St. Mary's Indian Residential School here in the Fraser Valley. And so when I think about it, I go through the atrocities and the terrible trauma that my grandmother must have lived through in order to survive that and then have children. And then she has multiple children, and then those children are born with that same intergenerational trauma. But there's hope in having a child, that things can improve. And so to me, I have a responsibility to lead the community the best I can, to lead my family the best I can, to set a positive example, to show that we can break these cycles, as you were talking about earlier, and that we can show that we are resilient and that we can overcome these things. But that thinking about things in a 7 generations lens is encouraging, in that that people sacrificed so much that you could never comprehend in order for you to be here today. And that is a shared story, I think, for so many people. If their parents fought in World War II or World War I, that we many of us have a story where our families fought for us to be here today, and they overcame horrendous odds in order for us to be here, and we should be grateful for that and appreciate it. And I'm just wondering if you can share your perspective on that.
I mean, it's totally true. And, that healing piece, a big part of it is forgiveness. I mean, I think about the history that I had and how fortunate I am that my mom raised me. And, she is a non-Indigenous woman who raised just on the reserve in community at WLFN. She instilled hard work and good values, and, at the same time did her best to hold up who we are as Indigenous people and what it means to be Secwepemc. I had a lot of animosity towards my dad growing up, and so did my sisters, because he was never around. And you start to learn your history, and you start to learn the traumatic experiences that your parents and your grandparents and great-grandparents went through. And you hear a story about how important it is to forgive in order to heal. And me and my dad have never been closer, but it took me a long time to get to that point, to understand why he is the way that he is, and make sure that me as a parent isn't doing that same thing, right? I mean, you've brought it up, and I think you take the best qualities of your parents and you use those with your own teachings to raise your kids, so that you can put your kids into a position to break that cycle. And generations from now, we're not going to be dealing with that. We are a generation removed from the Indian residential school system in this country. And, we're going to learn about it, and we're going to talk about it. But that same trauma that impacted my dad, and intergenerational trauma that impacted me, isn't necessarily going to have the same impact on our kids and future generations from there. So, I mean, it is exciting having these conversations too. Like, it's inspiring to think about, how successful we are considering, and how successful, our kids and great-grandkids and grandkids and great-grandkids are going to be moving forward. We just have to continue to be that mold and that model, and make our ancestors proud. every time I pick up that drum, I feel a little bit better, even if I'm having a bad day. Or every time you participate in ceremony, you feel a lot more pride. We're seeing it in our school districts too, where kids are proud to be Indigenous, and wasn't necessarily the case even 10 years ago, which is not that long ago. No, in our community here, we have a great powwow culture, and we have 2 powwows per year. Our Father's Day powwow that happens June 14th to 16th this year. Get a plug in here. And of course, our
Perfect.
competitive powwow that happens September 6th to 8th. We have a gorgeous arbor that our community actually built 25 years ago and 20 years ago. And you start to see more and more of these kids, dancing and wanting to pick up that regalia, and the amount of pride and how proud our elders are seeing that is so unbelievable to see. And that's just like one piece. The idea is that we need to continue to make them proud, both present day and into the future.